Hi, Group 4. I am recording a feedback video for your grant proposal presentation early draft. So I've already looked through your selected CFP, this one on astronomy and astrophysics research grants. And I've also pulled up your planning sheets in case I need to address that at any time, and I also have your early draft of your grant proposal presentation. So what I'm going to talk about mostly is your grant proposal itself, which is surprising to me because it's under the NSF, is that it's quite short. I mean, it's to the point. It's, this, and I'd already, when I Canvas messaged all of you to kind of talk about your issue with your client, I just quoted from this, but that's really all the information I could find on this particular grant, which is fine. I mean, it makes it easier for you, and there's no related documents, or, the version history isn't any different, and that's it. So what your group chose the grant that has the most money available to you. The last group that I just gave feedback to, your Group 4, so you're the last group I'm giving feedback to today, but the previous group had a monetary range of, I think, $500,000 to $25,000, which isn't a lot, and then you guys have $48,500,000. So that's not to say that they wouldn't break that out into, say they want to fund multiple projects. They could do that and break that. They're saying that the NSF for these astronomy and astrophysics research grants, they have a total of $48,500,000. So you can ask for $48 million, but $48,500,000, but maybe you ask for less than that. So it just depends on what you think you need for your particular project. So, and some of the feedback I'm going to give is probably going to be a little bit reiterative because I already messaged you about the fact that you don't have a client yet, and that is something that you want to rectify really quickly, because without a client, you're going to have a really hard time identifying a thesis and an objective. So just to kind of give a little bit of this is what a grant proposal is the organizations, individuals, or small groups of people can apply for grant funding, and grant funding is really supplemental money that people are awarded to do a project. And grant funding is very rare. It's very, very difficult to get, and if you get it, it looks really good for you. So it looks really good for you if you're a company and you've achieved grant funding. If you're an individual, you better believe that money goes on your resume or CV, because the fact that you were able to write a successful grant proposal suggests that you know how to write successfully and be able to obtain this grant funding. So, depending on who you are, an individual, a small group of people, an organization itself, you can apply for grant funding. And so there's and I know Stephen wrote me a few times to kind of get some clarification, which is totally normal, because if you've never written a grant proposal, this type of project can be kind of like, what are we doing? So I understand that. But what I recommended to Stephen is what it's what I've recommended to everybody, just because I think it's easier, is to position yourselves as the grant writers, and then you have a relationship that you have between you and your client, and then you and the person that has all the money, so the NSF. So I look at the presentations as if I'm the person with all the money. which unfortunately is not true in real life, but for the sake of the giving feedback, like I look at your presentation as if I were the NSF and I was reading this and determining, do I want to bestow grant money upon you, which is like an extravagant reward. So, and very difficult to get. So when I said that you needed a client, right, because in your planning sheet, you identify, well, you didn't identify anybody. You just kind of said who's eligible. So, and that was like, they're not restricting it to anybody, like anybody can apply for this particular NSF grant. And what you really need is somebody who is an actual client, because in essence, what you're doing is you're saying, we as grant writers are writing this proposal on behalf of this client to you, NSF, to ask you for money for this project, and we're going to persuade you that this client and their project objective aligns with the goals of your astronomy and astrophysics research grant, which is why you should give us the money. And writing grant proposals is very similar to writing a personal statement or a cover letter for a job, right? It's very much about what you can do for that person or that company. It's like a little bit about, like, you never want to say, like, here's what you can do for me. That's the type of rhetoric you want to stay away from in those types of documents, because it's all about, here's what I can do for you. And secretly, it's here's what you can do for me. But we don't say that out loud or in writing. That's just kind of something we keep to ourselves. So grant proposal writing is the same thing. It's all about, this is why this is an efficacious proposal, and we are a legitimate client, and we will take that $48,500,000, and over this period of time, this is what we're going to do with it, and these are going to be our deliverables, and this is how we will fulfill your need as the NSF. So the NSF is a government foundation. So the government gives the NSF money, and the government says, these are our goals as the government, right? We want to increase, technologies that have to do with astronomy and astrophysics, because we need to up our game in cosmological research. I don't know, right? So the government has some objective and says, okay, NSF, here's a bunch of money that we're going to give. You need to take this money and dole it out to people who are, or organizations who are going to fulfill this goal of ours, that as a country, we need more research or technology on a particular thing. Right, that's the NSF. So the NSF gets $48,500,000 and is now in charge of finding projects that fulfill this government request. And so the NSF needs to then look for those projects, and then we'll go back to the government and say, okay, this is what I did with your $48,500,000. Hope I spent it well, right? And so therefore, if you're awarded some type of grant funding or part of that $48 million, you will then have to provide a timeline, right? Whether it's 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, and say, with that, maybe you're asking for $2 million, right? With that money, this is what this client will do, and at the end of this, at the end of, if it's 10 years, right, maybe you have a 3-year goal, a 5-year goal, a 7-year goal, and a 10-year goal, right? And at all of those are called milestones, right? So at milestone 1, this is what we'll be able to do to demonstrate that we're on track to be able to delivering the deliverable for this grant project, and so on and so forth. So you kind of talk about, if you're like, I want $200 million, this is how I'm going to break down that $200 million request of this grant proposal and show you how I'm going to break that out to show you how it's going to be used over the years. If we're hiring people, how much of those people are going to get paid, for how long. This is the equipment we need. This is, do we need to rent space? All types of things you need. And I'm guessing a lot and I'm guessing that's why this grant is for so much money, is because it's for astronomy and astrophysics. So we're not talking about cheap stuff here. We're talking about equipment that's going to cost a lot of money, and especially if you're hiring people, those are not cheap people to hire. So people who have backgrounds and degrees and advanced degrees in astronomy and astrophysics, probably who have a publication record, those people aren't going to be cheap. So that's kind of what the grant is, which is why you need that client. And before I go into your presentation, I just pulled up Caltech as a potential client. And I just pulled up Caltech because I know that they're known for their astronomy and astrophysics. So I just pulled up the Caltech astronomy page, and they do have, and I clicked on research, and then I clicked on current projects. They have a couple. I didn't click on everything. But what's great about something like Caltech as a potential client, and this is just to give an example, you can use this or you can find your own client, but you do need an actual client that you would hypothetically be writing this grant proposal for. But they have these 3 different current projects, and I was looking at in your research proposal, I'm going to try to find it really quickly, which I don't know if I'll be able to. I think it's here. Yeah, where you talk about the rationale and the significance. This idea that we have attempted to understand these, and that's underlined because it should be phenomena with an A, at greater depth, which was mainly researched by theoretical physicists such as Stephen Hawking. Presently, we have an outstanding mathematical problem that is needed to address these important concepts regarding the forces of nature. Our aim is to research these fundamental forces and where limitations actually exist, find new ways to innovate and present new findings about gravity and related concepts, understand even more how these known forces impact space, time, and gravity. Okay, so this is a very research theoretical based objective, which is fine because in the grant proposal, it talks about that, if I remember correctly. I'm just going to double check it. Wait. Yeah, research in the astronomical sciences. So observational, theoretical, laboratory, and archival data studies. So it falls under that. But I chose this as a way to give you some type of grounding for your grant proposal project because, and for example, I didn't look at the PTF. I looked at the robotic adaptive optics on meter class telescopes, and then I looked at the cosmological evolution survey. I chose this one because this one is more theoretical based, so it aligns a little bit more with that rationale slide and the rationale and significance slide that your group has. So I thought if you were to use this as your client, you might be specific to, and I'm just going to use it as an example just to be able to talk about your presentation. But before I go on to that, like the Robo AO, this is more technology based. Of course, there's going to be theory in it, but it is about, I believe, building some type of laser adaptive optics. No idea what that is, but it's something for astronomy. Right, it monitors long-term astrophysical dynamics and characterizes newly discovered transients, all at the visible diffraction limits. No idea what that means, but sounds interesting. So this is specific to a technology, whereas the Cosmos is not. I didn't look at the PCF, the Palomar Transient Factory. I didn't look at this one, so I don't have much. I would have to spend too much time looking at it to talk about it. But just to give you an example, I'm just going to use Cosmos as like the initiative that your group might be writing a grant proposal for. So just to read about this, right? The Cosmos is an astronomical survey designed to probe the formation and evolution of galaxies as a function of both cosmic time and the local galaxy environment. And I chose this because it kind of has to do with that question of space and time that you bring up in your rationale. And the survey covers a 2 square degree equatorial field with spectroscopy and X-ray to radio imaging by most of the major space-based telescopes and a number of large ground-based telescopes. Over 2 million galaxies are detected, spanning 75% of the age of the universe. Again, that's kind of a little bit going into what you guys are talking about, and involves more than 200 scientists in a dozen countries. So you already have a lot of people at your beck and call, so to speak, if you were to go with this initiative. So essentially, what that would mean is this first slide that you have after your, and I like your, what you call this, the first slide. I like it. I would keep it like this. Maybe just change the date for when you submit the final. You want to, and what I've told everybody is that you want to treat the grant proposal presentation like an essay. So you start with an introduction, and so you can call it project summary, that's fine. You can call it project objectives, you can call it introduction or project introduction, anything like that. And you want to write it like you have it, which is in like a narrative form. But here you're just kind of summarizing the CFP. So you don't want to do that. Here's where you want to focus on. This is my client. This is the issue. This is what we're interested in. This is why, why we're applying for this grant. Here are the deliverables that that this client can offer after blah, 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 right? After so much time and with so much money. And that would kind of function as your thesis statement. So you need to kind of put that all in your introduction. And then, so once you have that down, then you go into, I would say, right, your introduction is going to be focusing on introduction to what this project is interested in. So, for example, your client would be Caltech, but you would be focusing on, it's really the Caltech astronomy. I just want to make sure I got their name right. This is it. That's all they got. The astronomy department is what I would call it. So your client, in essence, would be the Caltech astronomy department. And you would talk about how in the introduction, you would say, our client is the Caltech astronomy department, is looking for funding for its current project, the Cosmological Evolution Survey, Cosmos, right, in parentheses. The reason grant funding is needed for this project is this reason. With this grant funding opportunity, Cosmos would be able to do blank after so much time, like give a timeline, and then give an idea as to what the deliverable would be, and then that would be, in essence, and in a skeletal way, what your introduction would look like. And just like on pretty much every single slide that you have for your final submission, it needs to have source integration. So you need to have in-text citations, possibly quotations, because you're going to have to justify that this, and I'm just using the Cosmos as an example, but if this was what you use, right, you would need to have corroborative evidence that demonstrates that the work that Cosmos does is important, and that's why more money is needed to help support this project, because this project will or does align with the particular NSF grant that you have chosen. So you have to justify. You can't just say, this is a project that does this, you should give us money. It's like, no, you have to really make a case for it. You have to say, you really need to give us money because this is what we do and it's really important, and here's why it's important, and here's evidence that shows that this is why understanding the function of cosmic time and local galaxy environment is important. This is what that information will allow the NSF to, this information will allow people to do this, right, or understand this better. So you have to justify the choice of whatever client, and I'm just using this as an example client. And then after that, you would go into, so once you have the introduction, then what I would do is I would give a history of Cosmos. So I'd give a history of the client and include information. So here's what they've done. This is the important work they've done, right? They have all these scientists. Now, my first thought and a reaction and thinking as the NSF is, okay, this initiative has more than 200 scientists involved in a dozen countries. Why do you need more money? That's a legitimate question that the NSF might ask. So you need to, explore that. You would need to explore that justification. So maybe you need more scientists. Maybe you need more qualified scientists. Maybe these are scientists who aren't able to spend, they might be involved, but they might be involved very minutely because they might have full-time jobs and they can only spend a small amount of time on this Cosmos project. So maybe you want to hire some scientists full-time to just dedicate their time to this initiative. So you would have to kind of get an idea of who are these people and are they working full-time for this? I highly doubt it. They're probably just interested in it and maybe do a little bit of participation here and there. But I'm guessing this person, Peter Kapak, he's the leader, so he probably does a lot of work with it, and then all these other scientists probably do things here and there, but probably, I'm guessing, are not full-time. So that's what I would do next. Again, you don't want to summarize the CFP itself, but you would want to identify what from the CFP you're focusing on. Is it theoretical, laboratory, archival, astronomy, astrophysics? Is it all of that? You would want to talk about how the proposed project for the client meets the criteria of the CFP. So you would want to use the same specific language and then explain why. You can't just say it's theoretical. You would have to say it's theoretical in nature because of these reasons, or it's laboratory based, which I'm guessing means experimental based, like it's being worked on in a lab, or maybe something's being built, like a telescope, but or maybe it's a combination of those, and then give justification as to why. And I would have that as a separate slide. So the project description, sorry, I'm going to make this larger. is probably a little bit better. The program also considers proposals for projects and tools that enable, I think this is also quoted from the, anyways, this feels like you're writing a CFP or you're just quoting from the CFP. So the project description here should be, what does the project look like that the client is going to do? For example, if it was Cosmos, you would talk about, this is what Cosmos already does. With this grant funded money, we would be able to expand Cosmos to include X, right? Or it would be able to do this faster, or, right, you would talk about either you would make it a more robust program, or, you know, how Caltech would be able to maybe offer more funding opportunities for graduate students to work in this project, right? So you would have to think about what the actual project would look like. So that would need some work. And then you have a second page, which is again just contact a NSF program officer, but this is not a project description. And then you have a third page for project description. So these I would just trash. Because those don't have anything to do with an actual project description. And then we go back to, then we get to an introduction. So I'm a little confused about the organization, because you start with the project summary, then you have 3 pages of project description, and all of that is really just information from the NSF grant, or the NSF CFP. And then you go into the introduction, which, whoops, I've been doing that. Okay, and you've got 2 slides for your introduction. So you say the Division of Astronomical Sciences of the National Science Foundation is the primary source of federal funding support for ground-based astronomy in the U.S. The division supports a broad range of activities from funding national observation facilities. So I'm not sure, so as I'm reading as the NSF, I'm not sure why you are giving me information on the Division of Astronomical Sciences, because they're associated with the NSF. Again, you would not want them to be your client. So this is probably something that I would also trash. And your introduction should come at the very beginning, so there's no reason for you to have this information here. And I'm just looking at the second introduction slide. But here you talk about, and I'm guessing the division, you mean the same, this AST. But here you talk about the Gemini Observatory and the operation of the Atacama Large Millimeter Submillimeter Array. Division programs also support the development of advanced technologies and instrumentation, mid-scale projects, the planning and design for future observational facilities, and major collaborative projects. So here you're just summarizing something, and again, it's like, why are you summarizing it? What is this information telling me about a project, a project that's asking for grant funding? So as the NSF, I would say, I don't know why you're giving me this information. It's a decontextualized summary. And then the same thing here, and is just not relevant information. I already talked about the rationale and significance. This would just need to be with your identification of a client. This would probably be updated to reflect the rationale and significance, and with the kind of, since you don't need a lot of these slides that you have up here, like the ones that are just kind of copy pasted or just plain summary, you would kind of want to go project summary or introduction to information about the client and why they would be, what they can do for the NSF's goals for astronomy and astrophysics, and then going into maybe research questions, and then probably going into rationale and significance, right? And we talk about that in terms of significance of contribution, or contribution to the field. So what what that study, through the grant funding, what that study will provide in terms of knowledge about a particular something. And these are also great places for integrating research. Okay. And then you continue the rationale and significance, so I won't talk about that. And then you have the plan of the work. So this would probably, one of my main initial reactions when I first went through your early draft was that a lot of what you have should be answered already, or should be answered in your final draft. So like, if this is a table of contents would go toward the very beginning, potentially even before the introduction. So like, it's just, methodologically, it's just not in the right place. So you have aim 1, aim 2, aim 3, and then aim 3 is 3 slides, and then you have aim 4, aim 5, and aim 6. That's everything, which is follows this, but yeah, so what you're doing essentially is what we would call a process draft. So what you're saying here should already be done. So I've already kind of talked about, like, you would need to select which part of this you would choose. Is it theoretical? Is it, experimental or in the laboratory? Is it archival work? Is it observational? So you wouldn't have this slide, right? You should already identify that information in the introduction. And I told you where the research questions should go, right? Those should go close to the introduction, like close after the introduction. But then you would give answers to the research questions throughout the grant proposal final submission. The strategy, I would turn this into, again, these are things that you probably should have already done, and then because we already want to see integration of sources in here, which I don't think is really in here yet, but like, I would turn this just into, I would call it because how you want to structure this is you want like introduction, possibly a table of contents before, but your introduction might be 1 or 2 slides, and then you want kind of a brief history of the client, and really something that demonstrates that the client is a legitimate, valuable client that can perform what it's going to say it's perform and contribute to the field of astronomy and astrophysics in the way that the NSF wants, by including evidence, and then from there giving your research questions, and then going on to answering those research questions, and then going into logistics. So then doing something like a budget timeline, a detailed budget. So what does your budget look like? What's the timeline? How much money are you asking for overall? How do you plan on spending it? So detailed budget and timeline. So that might be like multiple slides, but we need a breakdown. If you're asking for like $200 million or $500 million, right? Is it 5 years, 10 years, 3 years, 1 year? How are you going to spend that money over the period of time that you state? For everything, are you hiring people? Do you need equipment? Do you need space? What is it that you need for whatever your proposed project is? And then you need a work plan, right? And that kind of goes into the timeline. So what are you going to do? What are the logistics? And that's kind of what you want to end with. You want to end with this logistics. But same thing with strategy. Like, this is all just like, we're going to do research, right? But you should have already done research at this point. And then So here you're going into, you should also probably have a page on personnel. So, and something that the planning sheet asks is about resources. Like, what are resources that are currently available to you? And then what are resources that you're going to need, that you hope the grant money would pay for. So if you do something like the Cosmos initiative at Caltech, then you would say, okay, our current available resources are these things, right? And you would list those on a slide. And then on another slide, you would have needed resources. And then you would list needed resources and potential costs of those, like per year. And then you would need a personnel page, and this is where you're kind of getting into it, but you would want to have who are the type of people that need to work on this project and what are their credentials, right? What kind of degrees do they need? Do you want them to have published in the field? How deep of a background do they need? So like what type of people do you want working on this proposed project? Moving on, proposed outline. So, okay, and I'm going to tell this now because I'm going to tell everybody in the announcement at some point today when I finish sending everybody their feedback. You do not have to do a written version of the grant proposal. So what you want to do is you want to revise your presentation, and that's the only thing you need to submit. And so this looks like you're getting into which I understand because that is what the instructions have, but this is more difficult because what it's asking you to do, and I don't write this assignment criteria, but I ignore this part of the assignment criteria because it's more difficult, because it's asking the students to go from a presentation early draft to a written version final draft. So there's too much difference, and they're actually in the process of getting rid of that criteria. So at least I think that's what this is. So it's easier for the students to stick with the drafts that they've already been working on and to revise the draft. So you don't have to worry about a text written narrative driven proposal. So you can just go ahead and like shoot, you can just shoo that on out of there. But I'm going to send an announcement about it to everybody because I had another group that had asked me a question about that, and that's just a continuation of that. Okay, so then you have negotiations. I'm not sure this is necessary, or if it's necessary, I don't understand why. And then review. Okay, yeah, you want this in here. What you want to position this as is, okay, depending on how long, whatever the timeline is for the proposed project, you need to talk about how you're going to assess it, right? Doing assessment. So here you're talking about assessment. So how are you going to do that? And how often? Like if it's a 10-year project proposal, how often are you going to do assessment? Are you going to do it 4 times a year, 1 time a year, once every 2 years, once every 5 years? And then whenever you do it, in what form or forms are you going to do it? So then you have to understand the medium of your data collection processes and how you're going to do the act of data analysis. So you definitely need to flesh this out a little bit more to talk about, and I wouldn't call it review, I would talk about metrics or assessment of programs success, right? Something along those lines. And you're probably going to want more questions than that in terms of the assessment. This might be like 2 slides. But yeah, you're thinking in terms of this, you're thinking in the right direction. Task breakdown. So, okay, so here you're talking about, and this is the first time you mention it, which on slide 21 is way too late to mention it. But you're talking about the proposal is 28 weeks and closes. Oh, so this is the So here you're actually talking about, I think, when you would submit the proposal, but you want this to be more what I talked about earlier in terms of the budget deadline, or not budget deadline, excuse me, detailed budget and work plan, or detailed budget and timeline and work plan. So you want, like, for example, if it's 10 years or 5 years or 3 years, we want, I want the NSF, the person with all the money. I need to see, what are you doing with that money and that timeline? So that's what you want to, so it's a good model. You just need to modify it to fit the timeline of the actual project. Facilities and equipment, yes, but I would make it specific to the project and the client rather than to the NSF. Personnel I already talked about. That's where you want to talk about who's going to be working on this project. Do you need to hire anybody? If so, what you want is you want a list of people who are, like I said, currently available resources and needed resources, and you might have personnel on both of those. You might have already available personnel, and then you might have personnel that is you need to hire. And then if it's need to hire, then what degrees do they have? What titles do they need? What, how long in their field of study do you want them to be? That type of thing. And then you have operation costs. I've already talked about costs to come in, and here it looks like you're talking about, and here you've listed a particular observatory. Although this is the first time you're mentioning it, and you're mentioning PhD researchers, so you're talking about graduate students, I think, or researchers who have PhDs. So PhD researchers means people who are in the process of getting their PhD versus researchers with PhDs, which are researchers who already have their PhDs. And then, so I'm not sure, but then you also mentioned again the Gemini Observatory. So I'm not sure I don't know what this is for. I'm looking at the 2019 to 21. I'm confused about the context of the cost. And that's because you haven't identified an operation. You haven't identified, like, this is our client, this is what the operation is, so to speak. This is the proposal, the project proposal we have. This is how much it's going to cost. This is the timeline, et cetera, et cetera. So I think because of that, by the time you get to operational costs, because you're missing all that information, this is really decontextualized. Okay. So that's all I'm going to talk about for now. So your group has a lot of work to do in terms of taking what you have and revising it to be really specific to a specific client, and then working to persuade the NSF to identify that this client and the project that this client has is worthy of however much money you're asking for, and then taking the NSF through the details of that project, including a detailed budget, timeline, and work plan. And then also don't forget that you want to include in the final submission source integration throughout the entire thing on at least every slide should probably have it. And then including that references page at the end, and also you want to turn in your planning sheet at the very, very end so you can put it after your references page, the planning sheet on the final submission. So if you guys have any questions, please let me know. I know there's only 3 people in your group right now, so if you have any questions, need any help, don't hesitate to reach out. Otherwise, I will be talking to you guys soon. Okay, bye-bye.